Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We will look today at Jeremy Corbyn's promise to buy 8,000 properties across the country to give immediate housing to those people that are currently homeless. Well, I'll tell you what I think when we get around to it. There's also a suggestion that luxury flats that are being kept deliberately empty by investors will be seized. Whether or not he intends to give them to the homeless is a little unclear, but hopefully won't be by the time we've finished. The huge rise in the number of fast food shops within a hop, skip and a wobble of primary schools and secondary schools is a cause for major concern, but should it be a cause for legislation and new laws? And hopefully we'll be able to do something with regard to IKEA and the passing of its rather colourful founder, simply because I think it's a little bit like Marmite, isn't it? Is it the Marmite of shops? Is anyone actually ambivalent, or is it all about love or hate? We shall find out. But we begin with, inevitably, the domestic political landscape. And, well, I'll tell you what I think, and then you tell me what you think. And if we're miles apart from each other, we'll try and build a little bridge. Not like a garden bridge, an actual bridge. We won't spend 46 million quid on it and have absolutely nothing to show. We'll hopefully at least have some sort of ground broken. I said to you some time ago, in fact, you're probably bored of hearing it, I don't see how she could play it any differently, because the whole conversation is about reality and dreams. I'm going to try to be more charitable. If I mention unicorns, give me a slap, all right? It seems to me, and it has done since the start, or at least since Theresa May assumed the reins of power, that she is trying to keep reality, or keep expectations managed. So what could she have done differently to avoid this sharpening of the knives that she is being exposed to now? That's the question we're going to end up with. So if you've got an answer to that, you don't need to hear what I think. You can ring in now. The question is simple. How could she have played it differently and or better? 0345 6060973. Your answer will probably have to encompass the general election result going the wrong way, because I don't know that you can argue she could have done it better if she'd got a bigger majority at the general election. The point is, how could she have played the hand of cards she's got better? So you could bring the general election into it and say she simply shouldn't have called it, but she had to because... ... So this is what a tangled web we've weaved, really. We've ended up in a place now where Jacob Rees-Mogg will be the next big Brexit phenomenon, because very simply he is the blue passport in human form. So no one has any idea what his views are, particularly on trade issues or on the complications that David Davis has had to go on a crash course to understand, the impossibilities of the positions that people like Liam Fox laid out, the sheer, I mean, absolutely spine-tingling ignorance of people like Nadine Dorries, who, a prominent Brexiter, outed at the weekend presumably by colleagues who were part of the same WhatsApp group that she took to relatively recently to ask for some help in understanding what the customs union was, because she'd been having a discussion about it with a politics teacher at an event the previous evening and found out she didn't know anything about it. So people explained to her what it was, and she concluded that she'd been right all along because it was so difficult to understand, therefore it must be right to get out of. I mean, you could carry on. So all of the people whose position is being very ugly, very slowly revealed as either just wrong or sinister, deceptive, dishonest, they're all falling from the wayside. They're all falling by the wayside one by one. Hey, you heard on this programme how David Davis's own department wouldn't contradict our suggestion that he spent the entire referendum campaign not knowing the most fundamental basics of trade negotiations. And so Jacob Rees-Mogg will become the blue passport in human form, the blue passport in a double-breasted suit. People who, and I want to stress that these are good people. It's stupid to allow this desperate attempt to turn us all against each other to succeed, but it's very hard to talk about them without without offending them. I don't understand this bit. When I say you don't know anything about what's going to happen next, but you think it will be worth it because you've got a blue passport, I am describing a person who will now think that Jacob Rees-Mogg is a suitable candidate for Prime Minister of this country. That is it. That's not an insult or a joke or an example of rudeness. It's a statement of incontrovertible fact. You have no idea what is going to happen next, but you know that you're going to get a blue passport. That's the only tangible thing that you've got so far, and you think it's enough to justify everything else, all of the unknowables and the unsayables. And I love you, you know, in a Christian way. I love you. I mean, I despair, but I love you. And that's what's going to happen now. And that is where the knife sharpening on the backbenches of the Conservative Party will inevitably lead, because Theresa May's decision to keep some of the key Brexit campaigners close to power, her decision to give them big jobs, has, and I didn't fully appreciate this at the time, and this is just me thinking out loud, so by all means, you know, take a pot shot at any element of it. But by putting Davis, Fox and Johnson close to power, by putting them essentially or ostensibly in charge of the whole thing, she robbed them of the ability to pretend it could go any differently. This was, in my view, I wouldn't say her stroke of genius necessarily, but this was her cleverest move. The fact that she was herself perceived as a Remainer lends itself to the kind of lazy knee-jerk demonisation that Britain has become a byword for. So now, all of those people who were cheering the Daily Mail front page that had her mocked up in front of the White Cliffs of Dover and that phrase, strong and stable, all of the people that were cheering that and all of the people in my profession who were encouraging you to go along with it, I couldn't at the time see how this could end any differently. It will end with Theresa May caught between several rocks and a handful of hard places. But, again, you know, I sit here every morning and I explain to you what I think is self-evident, what I think is absolutely crystal clear, and then 80 to 90% of the rest of the media swims off in entirely the opposite direction, which is fine. But then on a day like today, you just sit here and you say, there you go, look, he told you he was naked. There he goes, the Emperor, with his little buttocks wobbling all over the way. And tomorrow, the people who still want to insist that the Emperor is beautifully clothed will be lining up behind Jacob Rees-Mogg, because he's the only one left. Boris Johnson is interesting, but Boris Johnson is always interesting. He will inveigle and plot and plan and leak and spin in whatever way he believes will most advance Boris Johnson. And that means there's a fascinating paragraph in his biography of Winston Churchill. I must have mentioned this to you before. It actually beggars belief what he wrote about Churchill. He wrote that with regard to Nazism, Churchill definitely backed the right horse in the 30s. Because Johnson finds it impossible to conceive of a politician whose every move isn't made according to self-interest. So he wrote this. It's in black and white. It's not an opinion. It's a memory that I'm sharing with you. He wrote in black and white of Churchill sort of cynically exercising choice over which way to go with regard to Nazism as a career move rather than as an act of principle or an act of integrity. Maybe I'm being a little bit rose-tinted about Winston Churchill, whose CV was certainly not grounds for canonisation prior to the Second World War, but I just find that abhorrent on every level. The idea that fighting Nazism couldn't have been an act of principle or integrity for Winston Churchill. Rejecting appeasement couldn't have been an act of political purity. It had to be an act of self-interest, because Johnson can't see the world any other way. That's how he ends up writing off our wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill as essentially a careerist who did it for reasons of opportunism. So watch him always, but in terms of denying reality, it's all about Rees-Mogg now, isn't it? It has to be, because there is nowhere else that these people can turn. Nobody else can still claim that we're going to have our cake and eat it, that the sunny uplands are just around the corner. The less detail you are required to provide, the easier it is for you to sell snake oil, which is why she put the three in the proper jobs, because you cannot be Secretary of State for International Trade, Foreign Secretary or Secretary of State for exiting the European Union without coming face to face with detail. And we've seen it most powerfully, I think, with Davis. Those select committees where he chews gum insouciantly while Hilary Benn essentially shows him that he spent the entire referendum campaign and the early days of his job in charge of negotiations utterly ignorant of the most simple premises. There are a million different reasons why you should listen to this programme, but the biggest is probably not to be taken by surprise by these sort of events. If you listen to this programme, you will not have watched David Davis at the Select Committee last week and be shocked to discover that he genuinely didn't know the ABC of Brexit while campaigning for it and after becoming Secretary of State for it. He genuinely didn't know anything. You could see that from his Twitter account on May the 26th, 2016, but most people won't have seen that. Listen to this programme and you won't be taken by surprise. I can't, I'm afraid, come up with a tactic to ensure that the surprise doesn't chill you to the very core, but I can at least minimise the impact of that surprise, and I will continue to do so. And the upshot of that scenario, that sort of evidence-based scenario, is very simply that Theresa May could not have done anything differently because Brexit is impossible. And anybody who is still punting it can't admit that. So these are the handcuffs, the straitjacket, if you will, in which she has found herself. I think she was hoping for a sort of coalescing of contradiction. I think she was hoping that when it was, for example, revealed that David Davis didn't know anything, he would turn around and say, well, given that I actually didn't know anything, maybe I have been encouraging the country to do the wrong thing. Given that my ignorance is now absolutely self-evident, it's on celluloid, it's on tape, given that my abject ignorance is now utterly undeniable, maybe we need to have a bit of a rethink. I suspect that, Liam Fox, who's spent the last 18 months in charge of trade negotiations that he's not allowed to conduct, when that reality began to bite, perhaps she hoped that Liam Fox would turn around and say, oh, yeah, it turns out that we can't just sort of walk around the world making up our own rules and being referee. Maybe we should have a bit of a rethink. But he's not going to, because so much was at stake emotionally and politically on selling the snake oil. So and whether you're still on the bus, whether you're still convinced that we are embarked upon a path to something other than unnecessary pain, hopefully short term, you can't, I don't think, see circumstances in which Theresa May could have played her hand differently. I can't. I don't know what else she could have done if she had to sustain the delusion that Brexit could bear even a passing resemblance to what all of its chief cheerleaders said it would be, often in contradiction of each other. So you now have 4, possibly 5 different positions on Brexit within the cabinet alone. Forget about the country. Within the cabinet alone, you've now got 4, possibly 5 different positions, all of which can legitimately claim to represent 17 million voters, but they can't agree with each other. That's the mess, in a nutshell. That's the complacency of David Cameron writ large. 4 or 5 different Brexit positions. In the cabinet alone, 30-odd individual members of the same political party have 4 or 5 different specific positions. And that's Brexit happening. I'm not even thinking about half of the cabinet that doesn't want it to. So the ones that say they want it to happen, 4 or 5 different positions, all of whom would, in the world of tabloid Britain, be allowed to claim that they represent the views of 17 million people. Of course, the only ones who will be allowed to claim that they represent the views of 17 million people are the ones who represent the views of the editor and the owner of the Daily Mail and the Sun. So that is where we are now. And I hope it's not too bitter a pill for you to swallow if you were hoping for more substantive improvements to your life than a different coloured passport. But unless you can explain how Theresa May could have done things differently, I don't know how anyone today can still cling on to the notion that Brexit means anything. 0345 606 0973, unless you're still buying into the idea that Brexit means everything. And Jacob Rees-Mogg is now the last man standing on this. And that's frightening, just for reasons of deference. The fact that somebody who appears to have been transported from the second decade of the 19th century, fully clothed into the middle of modern Britain, and a significant swathe of the population think that because he's very posh, he must somehow be born to lead. There's no evidential basis for having faith in Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's all personal. And that's where we are now. This weird movement that claimed to represent ordinary working class people has ended up giving the embodiment, the very personalisation of inherited privilege, this sort of epic groundswell of support. He's only one step away from getting a golden lift. She was the new Iron Lady. She was anointed by the Murdoch male axis. She was held up by staunch so-called Brexiteers as precisely the strong and stable pair of hands they needed to deliver their dream. But it's now become clear that it was just a dream and therefore undeliverable. So Theresa May is getting it in the neck from all of the people who still insist that things could have gone differently. So my question to you, and in many ways I'd quite like to be humiliated on the programme today with a neat encapsulation of how she could have done things differently, because what you're going to get now is the claim that, yes, Brexit is a shambles, but it's all May's fault, not my fault for believing the people who told me it wouldn't be a shambles and being incredibly rude to all the people who told me that it would be a shambles. James is in Waltham Abbey. James, how could she have done it differently?
Hi, good morning, James. Thanks for taking my call. I personally, I do not think she could or would have wanted to do it differently, actually, because, as I said to you, your guys on the desk, I think she was a puppet. I think we were missold the whole idea. I was a Brexiteer.
What do you mean a puppet?
She was placed in there. She didn't want the job. I mean, she didn't want the job of Brexiteer, did she? Because she was a Remainer. And
she didn't have to run for Prime Minister, mate.
Again, I think she was just the best person for the job at the time.
She was the only candidate left standing. She didn't have to put her hat in the ring. This is where I come over a little bit dewy-eyed, because I think she's done it out of a sense of patriotic duty, but while being unable to say out loud that I have to do this, I have to keep this ship as steady as I can while I wait for the rest of my party to realise what a nonsense course we've embarked upon. But if you voted for it, I doubt you're going to agree with that analysis.
Do you know what? I'm one of these people that I do actually regret doing what I did. I was astonished, like the 17 point whatever million, and it was only by a very slim margin that the things got through. But
this is going to sound terribly rude. I'm not quite sure why you phoned me. I'm glad you have. don't get me wrong, but
sorry.
In many ways, I'm looking for the people who are still in denial, the people who think she could actually have done it differently, because I can't, for the life of me, see how the cards could have fallen any differently.
No, you're probably right. Actually, I'm just voicing my opinion. And sorry, James.
I don't. That's what I said. I don't want to sound ungrateful. Crikey, I spend 15 minutes every morning thinking out loud on the radio. But people at least know what they're going to get when it's me. I don't know that James in Waltham Abbey's public cogitations, public contemplations are the same. What do you think is going to happen next?
I think there's going to be potentially a second referendum on that's on the cards anyway. And if Macron and they want it, there's going to be a backfalling, and also I think what we're going for anyway is just Brexit all in name and nothing else.
Yes, but again, I'm left wondering what the alternative could possibly have been, and I salute your honesty. Actually, I'm glad you did ring, because I think that the confusion that you just articulated is probably the inevitable first step away from realising that you got your vote wrong. 26 after 10, and we have to find a way to remove any sense of shame or criticism from people who are open-eyed and open-minded enough to admit that they've made that mistake. Or, unless, of course, there is an answer to the question of what could Theresa May have done differently that would make a nonsense of my suggestion that eventually reality has to bite everybody in the way that it's clearly bitten James in Waltham Abbey. Let me give you the phone number, 0345 6060 973. This is one of those exercises in fate tempting, because for all the sort of furious Brexit rhetoric and pro-Jacob Rees-Mogg claims out there, I don't think anyone can describe how Theresa May could have done things differently. And I'm going to keep asking that question until we've given up. And then, in an ideal world, we could all admit that she couldn't have done, but we won't. We'll have half the country still shouting, she could have done things better, if only she'd done this, she should have been tougher, she should have done that. And as soon as you ask for detail, it all falls apart. Colin's in Camberley. Colin, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Colin.
Your question is, could she do things differently? I think her first objective was to become PM, because that's the objective of most politicians, and you get yourself a bust in the House of Commons and you live forever in infamy or wherever. But
yeah, okay, we can just leave that on the board, can't we? That's fine.
All right then. Yeah. Okay, Brexit impossible. Anybody who works, lives, or even reads about Brexit knows it's impossible.
Well, that's now we're in the realms of let me read my profile from The Sun, because you can have a bit of this as well. Soon as you say that, and I've said it all morning, so I'm not criticising you, you become the epitome of a smug, sanctimonious, condescending, obsessively politically correct, champagne socialist public schoolboy Ramona, if you simply describe reality. That's the editor of The Sun, Tony Gallagher, still not replied to our request for an interview. I'm sure it's because he's too busy being all brave and outspoken. But it seems to you and me that reality has to bite everybody eventually. It doesn't necessarily mean that the way she's done it was the only way, does it?
Well, James, you've all heard of King Canute when his subjects said, "Oh, King, you can do anything, and you could stop the waves coming in." We've got people out there who think this is doable, and you've got to show by example. So when you said that she put Johnson, Fox, and Davis in, that's the first step, because they're doing the thing that they say can be done. So no argument there.
Yes.
So we've got to go through this really painful process, because the EU is not going to get... There is no deal. Let's face it. May's own red lines, which, again, could be a tactic, show we're not going to get anything but a Canada deal, which is going to be disastrous. Which
won't include financial services, which takes 10% out of our economy almost immediately.
And pharmaceuticals, everything, it's going to kill us, basically. But you can't tell Brexiters this.
Why not? I possibly have spent more time banging my head against this particular brick wall than anybody else in Britain, so I'd love to know what the view is like from Camberley. Why can't you tell them that? What is it that creates the blockage in their passages?
It's funny you should say that. I ran to a Brexiter yesterday that are all converted just by having a quick chat.
Yes,
I
of course.
see it by a little bit.
Steady on with that. It's a little. My kids need shoes, mate. I don't want you nicking my act.
All right. I do blame the journalistic world, but unfortunately it is run by certain people, as you know. So the three key lies of Brexit are sovereignty, immigration, and ECG.
Yes.
We've got sovereignty. The government wrote it in their white paper. Page 2, it says there, we've always had sovereignty. Bang, lie number 1 busted.
Yes.
The ECJ cannot interfere in national law. Bang, lie number 2.
Yes.
Okay, immigration, we've always had control over immigration.
Didn't know this at the time. I think 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing. I wasn't fully au fait with that 3-month rule that is imposed in countries like Belgium, to be honest with you, and I'm a journalist, so I wasn't selling the opposite line. I wasn't saying it didn't exist, but I didn't do nearly enough to explain its existence, because I was trying to be blinking impartial. Biggest mistake of my career. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, I was even sitting last night with my brilliant other half, who is probably far more intelligent than I is, and she made a comment about, when somebody disagrees with the courts in this country, they take it to the ECJ. And I said, no, hold on, no, they can't. You're thinking of the Court of Human Rights, which, again, is nothing to do with the EU.
But you're doing the detail again, and the detail, it all falls apart. Do you think Theresa May could have played the hand of cards she got any differently?
No, James, all she can do is hang on, stop people like Rees-Mogg taking over, who will take us off the cliff. She needs to hang on.
Why would he take us off the cliff? I mean, this is a genuine question. I'm a little late for the news, but I agree with your analysis. I'd like us both to be wrong, but what do you think motivates him, if it's so obvious to you that his kind of blind Brexit is bonkers?
Okay. His self-motivation is probably going to be the tax avoidance laws that are going to come in from the EU.
And the idea that, and the financial tax transactions that they've... I think we vetoed it last time. It was actually before the European Parliament. So you mean his role, I think the only job he's ever done as a hedge fund manager, as a money mover, might be perhaps the explanation for his politics. I hope not, actually. I'd prefer to give him the benefit of the doubt. 10:31 is the time. Not a Brexiter in sight, not one. This is because we furiously vet all calls and only let on stupid people, if you dwell in certain corners of the internet, or it's because all of the people who are still insisting that Brexit is a good idea and Theresa May could somehow have played her cards differently are too, what word should we use, querulous to call in. Come on, guys, don't be shy. Just a neat little encapsulation of tabloid Britain, OK? I ask you whether or not you think Theresa May is doing a good job, OK? And we can all scream until we're hoarse that she isn't. Whether you're pro-Remain, pro-Leave, whether you're changing your mind, whether you've got a mind, whether you're wobbling, wibbling or quibbling, we could all shout an answer to that question, couldn't we? No, she's doing an awful job. Absolutely awful. I don't think anyone thinks she's doing a good job, although we'll keep a phone line free for anybody who wants to defend that corner. Ask how she could have played it differently, and there is comparative silence, especially if you qualify differently as better. How could she have played this hand of cards given to her by the so-called will of the people better than she has? And I'll take anything you've got, 0345 6060 973, because hand on heart, I'm not sure you've got anything. And these are the moments that I used to think cause pennies to drop and light bulbs to come on and minds to change. But the more evidence I give you that the people who told you this would be good for our country are wrong, the angrier you get with me. It's weird. Ian's in Watford. Ian, what would you like to say? How could she have done it better?
I have to start with the thing I would say, you can't really start from here. She couldn't do it really much better, but I voted Brexit, not for the reasons many people. I looked at the whole of Europe, and I was not satisfied that many people in Europe were functioning, the EU was functioning well for them.
Okay.
I don't know where you stand and how many people you mix with. I mix with quite a lot of people from Romania, many of the countries, and very educated people. And had they come here to work in coffee shops, to be driving cabs, to be all sorts of things. And my question was, there's something fundamentally wrong where when your child grows up and gets a university degree and then has to go and work in a coffee shop in Italy, would you think there's something wrong with your system?
I think I understand what you're saying, but what was the alternative? Staying at home in Romania and not even having a job in a coffee shop in Italy?
No.
What then? What would happen?
My hope was, by voting Brexit,
yes,
if whether it was tight, was that you could have then gone to the EU and said, look, boys, it's time that we made some flexibility.
You were a reformer.
I'm a reformer.
Okay, I understand that position. Hang on. Well, no, I do understand that position, and I think that I mean, it backfired a bit when the result came in, didn't it? Because what you really wanted to do was give them a scare and then get them to roll over a little bit more than they did when Mr. Cameron sought to secure special treatments or broader reforms, a bit like what Macron is promising to do once we've gone. So I have to steer you back to the question I'm actually asking, though. I do apologise, which is how could Theresa May have played the hands she was given better than she has?
To quietly have gone back into the EU and said, boys, come and let's sit down, let's see what you can do here. That would be my thing.
I love you, Ian. I love you like a brother from another mother. But if you think Theresa May could have announced shortly after becoming Prime Minister that we were going to stay, but on better terms than we're currently in. Remember what they were doing to High Court judges, Ian, enemies of the people. This is Joseph Goebbels stuff.
No, I mean, not everything has to be done publicly. Unfortunately, we're now running politics by announcements coming out before the announcement comes out, which is...
So the entire government was announced before the announcement came out. Apparently it was Gavin Williamson that told her that she had the DUP votes in her pocket, and then after she told the Queen she had the DUP votes in her pocket, the DUP said that she didn't. I mean, that sums up her entire administration, actually.
The whole thing is very... Look, I make a very simple thing about politicians, and I say to people the following: of all the cleverest people you've met, and you probably count as one of them in a way,
bless you,
who were both honourable and capable, how many would truly choose to go into politics?
Would have done once, Ian. Would have done once.
We're not talking about once. We're talking about now.
I know. I unfortunately, I won't go into detail, but you have to be. Well, I'll tell you what I think is the next chapter for this country, if it is to be saved. It will be people going into politics who really don't want to. A bit like the old Groucho Marx adage about not wanting to be in a club that you're a member of. If it carries on like this, then people who are currently either for reasons of self-interest, reasons of material interest, just saying, nope, not for me. People who don't like the idea of being served up for like a dog's breakfast every morning in the Sun or the Mail, those will be the people that have to come to the country's rescue, because the charlatans and the self-interested spivs have brought us to this. Don't be silly, James. It's not that bad. Here is a way in which Theresa May could have played her hand differently, except no one's really offered it up yet. 0345 6060 973. Ian's suggestion that we could have had a kind of soft Remain, secret Remain, makes a terrible mistake. It employs rational thinking to address an utterly irrational problem. James is in Exeter. James, what would you like to say? How could she have done things better?
Morning, James. One absolutely massive thing that I think could have been done differently, which was that she didn't have to trigger Article 50. She could have waited, or at least attempted, to have sought some kind of consensus amongst her cabinet, if nothing else, as to what that was eventually going to mean, but she didn't.
But that was reality deferring, though, wasn't it? And this was because the minute that she sought to seek consensus among her cabinet is the minute we get to where we are today, with 4 or 5 different warring factions in the cabinet, all claiming to represent the will of the people. I think she knew that. I think she triggered Article 50 as a holding tactic. This, it seems to me, where we are now, is inevitable. I think. I only think that. I don't think I could prove it. But it seems to me to be inevitable. And she has postponed the inevitability, and she's kicking it a little bit further down the road with stuff like the fudge over the Irish border that was announced just before Christmas to get us into the next round of negotiations. And if she hadn't postponed that inevitability, what would have happened? What would have happened if we hadn't triggered Article 50, which was her biggest result from the tabloid press, remember, of her entire administration? That was the moment at which she told Europe to, get stuffed, wasn't it?
I think she would have been under massive pressure politically. I don't know whether she would have ultimately survived that or not.
No.
But she would not have lit the fuse on a ticking time bomb. And if you're thinking about what's best for the country or what's best for me as an individual, to me it just seems crazy to have lit that fuse on the basis that, oh, don't worry, we'll figure it out as we go along.
But it's a fuse. Forgive me for torturing your own analogy. It's a very long fuse. Whereas you're suggesting she should have just set fire to the dynamite on day one.
No,
you are kind of not triggering Article 50 in the court of the Daily Mail and Rupert Murdoch would be political suicide back then.
Yeah, possibly. But in deciding to trigger it, you then set a definitive date for which potentially the country goes off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
So whilst it may have been put her in a very difficult position, if she hadn't triggered it, and perhaps she still hadn't triggered it, we would be in the middle of having all these enormous arguments that we're now having now, and it would
but reality doesn't bite until it's triggered. I think until it's triggered, you can claim that we're all getting a unicorn delivered next week. You can claim, and sometimes I use the unicorn line, but the line that really should resonate is you can claim that we can have our cake and eat it. The man who now occupies one of the greatest offices of state in these islands said to the voting public of Britain, you can have your cake and eat it. He employed it's a lie, it's a snake oil so vicious that it's actually part of our common parlance as a cliche. The impossibility of having your cake and eating it. And Boris Johnson, who some people still talk of as a potential Prime Minister, stood in front of the British public and called them all idiots. And they agreed with him.
But how about if she had positioned herself as a kind of a neutral arbiter? I
don't think she was allowed to. I mean, it was the Earl of Warwick, wasn't it, in the Wars of the Roses that got called the Kingmaker. These days, it's the owners and the editors of The Sun and the Daily Mail. There's make no bones about it. They're the kingmakers. Look at what they were saying about her just a year ago. She was sort of a cross between Boadicea and Margaret Thatcher. And now she's toast. Why? Because she could not deliver anything that they told their readers was possible.
But if you were in a position where you were in a car and people were applauding you and clapping you and saying it's wonderful, keep driving towards that cliff edge, and you went, oh, well, everyone loves it, so I better do it.
And maybe when we get there, it won't be a cliff edge at all.
Well,
something would have happened. Maybe Boris Johnson would have spent 46 million quid on a wonderful new parachute that would save us. But that's it. I mean, you can hear in James's voice, in my voice, there's no pleasure in this at all. That's another massive divide between these two camps. The idea that anybody would want their country to suffer is just freakish to me. Genuinely freakish. These are our children, our potential grandchildren. And I'm very grateful to MB in Gloucester, because I don't think, I'll just check with Beth, has anyone rung in yet with a genuine, like a Brexit view on how things could have gone better, as opposed to how bad is Theresa May, or how cross are you, or how let down do you feel? You need to tell me what. I don't think anyone has, so I'll have to rely on texts. Listening to your opinion on Brexit, writes MB in Gloucester, just reinforces me that I made the right decision in voting leave, and the Ramonas need that unicorn horn stuck up there you-know-where. The question you keep asking, how May could have done it better, well, she should have gave us Brexit and gone straight to WTO, as we were told. Then we would have seen the EU wanting to make a deal with us. So you want to give all the power to the EU while surrendering our sovereignty to the World Trade Organization? I can see why people like you don't ring in. It's 10:47. And it occurs to me that phrase, no overall majority, when it came out of David Dimbleby's mouth in the small hours after the last general election, that's when everything changed. Because, seriously, sometimes you have to sort of take a step back and double-check that you're remembering things rightly. Up until that general election result came in, Theresa May was being cheered to the rafters by every Brexiter in the land, whether they edit newspapers or flip burgers. Everybody who had fallen for the idea, or just believed the idea on the side of that bus, or believed the claim by Boris Johnson that it's possible to have cake and eat it, or been caught up in the nonsense about borders and laws and all of this, right up until that point, all of the kind of little Englanders who had led that campaign, plenty of decent people who don't deserve that pejorative were persuaded to follow it. But right up until the general election result, she was a cross between Margaret Thatcher and Boadicea, right? You remember that? And all of the people now that told you that she was brilliant are telling you she's rubbish. So whose judgment should we really be calling into question here? The cheerleaders or the cheered? But we won't, because the cheerleaders are just going to move on now, I suspect, to Jacob Rees-Mogg, the only politician in Britain who would allow the delusion to be sustained, because he's curious. Has he talked about elites yet? That'll be when we know we've gone absolutely down the rabbit hole, possibly irredeemably for a generation. If Jacob Rees-Mogg, who I'm told used to stand up in his study at Eton to salute silently whenever the national anthem came on at the close down on his radio, if Jacob Rees-Mogg ever talks about the elites somehow damaging the lives of non-elites, then we'll know it's all over. If anyone's going to swallow that, then the game's up, isn't it? All I want, 10:53, an explanation of how Theresa May could have handled this better. And, of course, all of the people who are pro-Brexit that can't answer that question can't even allow themselves to try to answer that question, because it would be to admit that the hand she was given, i.e. a vote for Brexit, was unplayable. Sean's in Scarborough. Sean, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. Pleasure to speak to you. I think, so to answer the question that you've asked, what could Theresa May have done differently? I think the fundamental thing to look at here is, fine, so she gave a position to Boris Johnson.
Just sort your phone out, will you, Sean? I don't know whether you've given it a bit of a wobble since you got put through, but you're breaking up a bit.
Sorry, is that any better?
It is a little, yeah. Go on.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think one of the things that's happened with this is that you look at what happened with Boris Johnson. He's been given a position that I think the entire country pretty much scratched their heads at the position he was given. You know, she didn't put people who were the best people for the job into those positions. She put the people that she feared the most into those positions.
Yes.
What she could have done differently is put the best people to handle difficult, complex negotiations and difficult, complex situations into these positions.
You don't mean experts, do you?
No, but, you know, when you... I'm going to play a bit of a difficult card here,
yeah.
But when you look at who could have been from the Labour side on their negotiation team, it's a very different type of person that you had involved. It looked and it felt, when I was looking at that potential team, that the skill set was there.
Keir Starmer, Hilary Benn, people like that, they may have fallen foul in some cases of the current leader, but you think in a sort of, it would be like a coalition negotiation team, a team of all the parties. Do you know the problem with your analysis, as it occurs to me, is that you are, if I was to typify it lazily, I'd say you're describing her trying to make the best of a bad lot, But of course she couldn't do that because it would have involved stating that it was a bad lot at a time when the political climate was attacking judges and politicians and academic freedom, academic independence. There was no way she could have stood up and said, look, this is really, really bad, but we're going to make the best of it. She had to pretend she thought it was good, which is where the most meaningless phrase in Strong and Stable, Brexit means Brexit, came into public parlance.
I would disagree with you on that point, and I would only disagree with it from a point of view of if Theresa May had stood up on the podium and said, this is how we get the best out of Brexit and really make Brexit work, and I'm going to put these key people into this.
But it'd still be worse than what we've already got. That's the thing. That's the elephant in the room.
She could have said it with conviction. Whereas I don't think, in good conscience, she can say with conviction that she put, for example, and I'm using the name again,
yes.
She couldn't say with absolute conviction she put Boris Johnson in the position because he was the right man for the job. And that, more than anything else, makes a farce of the entire Brexit process.
Yes, I suppose that is the third strand, if you would, the third way that I hadn't properly acknowledged, that if you could have created an environment in which she could have somehow sold Brexit as I don't see how she could have sold it objectively and in an evidence-based fashion as being better than the status quo, but she could have perhaps... maybe sold it as a more serious project to be undertaken by serious people against a backdrop of a vote that was delivered largely as a result of Michael Gove's suggestion that the country had had enough of experts. It's fascinating, this. I'm going to carry on with this until Thursday, until someone who's actually persuaded that Theresa May could have done it better rings in. 0345 6060 973. And I don't mean like Sean, somebody who accepts the difficulty of her position because what she was asked to deliver was impossible. She could have been more honest about how impossible it was and more open about who might help her manage the impossibility. I mean, someone who still thinks it's brilliant. Let's have a look at the text. Always a good place. So here we go again, you Romaniacs spewing garbage, which is pretty much the catchphrase of people that don't want their opinions to be properly examined. And that's where we're going to have to go next. Jacob Rees-Mogg might give you another 6 months of being able to pretend that this isn't all an almighty mess. But after that, reality will bite even harder. The question now is how much damage is going to be done to our country while these delusions are sustained by people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and the editors and owners of the Daily Mail and the Sun. Jill's in Isha. Jill, what would you like to say? How could she have done it better?
Oh, good morning. Quite simply, by just not being so pusillanimous.
Go on.
She should have just gone in there and she should have said, we're leaving, right, these are the deals, this is what we're going to do, and walked away and said, take it or leave it.
She has done that. That's what Article 50 is.
Pathetic. No. She has
I apologise for interrupting you, but let's just get some facts on the table. Yes, I am, but because it's very important that my listeners aren't misled. Article 50 puts a 2-year limit on leaving. She triggered it much quicker than most people thought she should have done, so she gave them the message that we would walk away much, much earlier than anybody else would have advised. And the second point is the red lines that she's put in place about the things we will not compromise on tell them exactly where we stand. The problem is, Jill, and your analysis perhaps has to ignore this point, is the European Union didn't blink.
But what have we got to lose? You know, the problem is she should have got real
freedom of movement, between 28 countries, access to the largest single market in the world, membership of the largest single market in the world, freedom to trade with the largest single market in the world, plus the treaties delivered. No, you asked me a question. What have we got to lose, Jill?
No, you asked me a question and interrupted my answer.
Because you were telling porkies.
No, I was not.
So how could she have triggered Article 50 sooner?
She could have done it the next day.
So you think she should have done it even sooner?
She should, yeah, absolutely.
Right, and how would that have been different?
And said, but she's the pathetic way she's going about
Yes, but these are just adjectives. We're dealing in substance.
Oh, yes, well, we want to keep us. We want to do this. We want to be this. You know, I want somebody in the true Remain camp, like yourself. Give me a good reason why we should say. You keep saying to me, but if it's Brexit, we're falling off a cliff. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. You know, what's going to happen? Could you tell me what would happen if we stayed in the EU?
Yes, your life would be exactly the same as it is now.
No, it wouldn't. Because they're starting. We would have unlimited immigration. I don't care about immigration. That's not why I voted.
Well, tell me what you do care about, Jill. Otherwise, this is going to be a slightly odd exchange.
Right? Yes. I care that there are 751 MEPs that are transported every month 400 kilometres between Brussels and Strasbourg.
You asked me what...
No,
I said things would stay the same, and you said they wouldn't.
Yes.
So what would be different then?
Well, because they're insisting that we would have to be part of the euro. I don't want.
No, we wouldn't. We don't have to be part of the euro. Anyone who told you that lied to you. Next.
Well, that's what you believe.
No. That is recorded fact.
No, that is what you think.
Okay, so you think that the United Kingdom could have been forced to join the euro? I can't. I love you, Jill. You're a lovely, lovely woman. But if you say things that are demonstrably untrue and then just get louder when I point out that they're demonstrably untrue, I think we let our listeners down.
I hate the fact that you say all I voted Brexit was because I wanted a blue passport.
I've never met you, Jill.
I think, you generalise on the whole...
Well, tell me what you did vote for, then.
Well, I've just told you when you keep interrupting
No,
me.
you told me that you don't like the number of MEPs, but that was in response to asking me what would have happened if we'd remained. I said things would stay the same, and you started talking about 751 MEPs. I don't want to embarrass you, Jill, but all I can do is repeat your words back to you.
You're not embarrassing me at all.
Well, that's a relief.
You're embarrassing yourself.
You're absolutely right.
Your comments are so pathetic that you think there would be...
Who's more pathetic, me or Theresa May? Who's more pathetic?
You're both pathetic.
Okay. Well, can I be more pathetic?
I wasn't going to be, actually. I wanted to be really nice. I didn't want to.
Still free to be nice, Jill. It's not my fault. It's not like I have no control over what you see in the mirror.
But you want to be ruled by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, do you?
Well, you want to be ruled by Theresa May, who you think is pathetic and pusillanimous.
I really was angry the day that they got her.
So you voted Corbyn, did you?
Furious. No, I didn't.
I thought not. It's 11:02. And no, we're not going to add the word gilarious to our programme's vocabulary. We are, however, going to respond with a heavy heart to yet more evidence that if you don't let people say things that are untrue, you somehow become the problem. So the suggestion that we'd be forced at gunpoint to join the euro, the suggestion that voting to remain in the European Union would not have evinced any major changes to our lives until we got stuck into a proper process of reform that looks like being led by Emmanuel Macron. These are just statements of fact. And yet you ask how Theresa May could have done things differently, better, and you've got nothing. Absolutely no. She could have been tougher. How? And all of the people that were pro-Brexit were cheering her from the rafters for being so tough. This is reality biting. But, of course, it is very, very difficult to accept that reality is the polar opposite of what you were told it would be. So we'll carry on looking for explanations of how Theresa May could have done things better. And if you say things that are, at best, simply untrue, I will point out that they're untrue. If you want to carry on talking after that, that's fine. Or if you point out or claim things that are scaling cake-and-eat-it levels of delusion, then, again, I'm afraid I have to point them out. We have a responsibility to our listeners. 80% of the British media is engaged in an act of mass deception. And this tiny, tiny little corner of it will not join in. If you want to claim that we have to join an army, you need to explain to me, A, what happened to our power of veto, and B, why we should be frightened of armies that we're in. If you want to claim that we'd have to join the euro, you'd have to explain to me where you're getting that evidence from, because there isn't any evidence to support that position. If you want to claim that they need us more than we need them, you have to prove it. If you have to claim that it's possible to have your cake and to eat it somehow at the same time, you have to do it in front of me. That's all I want. And it's so small, this voice, and yet so scary to everybody, really, right up to the editor of the Sun newspaper. It's bizarre, isn't it? And you must not be rude about people like Jill. You must not be rude. Whether you're on one side of the argument and you're now claiming that the people like that are specially selected because they'll fall apart on the radio, that's just obnoxious. Come on, big man, you ring in if you think you can do better. And if you're on my side of the fence, the side of reason and rationality, then you should be better than to laugh at people who have been conned in this way. It's incredibly frustrating when you explain to people that they've been conned and they respond by getting angrier with you than they are with the con man, but that's just a matter of patience. It's patience and time. And eventually, reality will bite. And if you think Theresa May could have played her hand better, you tell me how. 0345 6060 973, because she was dealt an unplayable hand. And all she's done is put off and postpone and prevaricate having to turn it over and show the country what's really in it. Assad is in Ilford. Assad, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First, I think I would like to just mention that, in occasions like the previous caller, I think we need to let them talk a bit longer because they actually reveal the flaws in their approach, and I think that maybe
I've been doing this a little bit longer than you have, and if you allow people, look, mate, if you allow people to talk unchallenged and say untruths, we end up with Brexit.
Fair enough, yeah.
So what did you ring in to say?
Well, I think your question, I believe, assumes one of the two, like either that Theresa May has a set of principles that she's following,
sort of,
or exactly. So I think like the way I see it is it's the latter. I don't think that she has principles. I think like she's mostly in that position, or most of the actions that she's taking shows me that she is there to hold on to that power, and I think that's. Leading from that assumptions, yes, it's right that she couldn't have done that better. But if we go the other way, like that, if we assume that she has some sympathy towards this this situation.
That's that, my friend. With the greatest of love and respect, is there a point on the horizon?
Yes.
Good. Let's get there quickly.
Well, I mean, like one thing that I would like to say is that I think she shouldn't be in that position anymore. And then the only way that she could do is to follow what she believes. Like, I mean, before Brexit, she was a Remainer, and I think she should stand up to it. If
okay, mate. No idea. Sorry. She shouldn't be in the job, but she should do what? Dan is in Great Missenden. Dan, help me out.
Oh, hello, James. First-time caller.
You're very welcome.
The last 18 months or so, you became visible when Brexit was happening, and to be honest, you're therapy for me. About an hour a day to listen, and very, very, very good.
Gives with one hand, takes away with the other. I am here for 3 hours. Anyway, I normally move people along very quickly if they dedicate their opening comments to me, so even if they're positive, I should move you on slightly less quickly. Anyway, what do you want to say? How could Theresa May have handled it better?
Okay, so she had a very small window when Cameron went and she got elected. And I think what she could have done better is she could have got an aligned cabinet to an agenda which was focused on the Tory idea of the market, etc. And she should have focused more on a Hammond-style approach, and she should have got instead of
you're existing in a universe where the Daily Mail has no power.
This is a brave move. She had a bad hand, right? and she's tried to appease, right? She's tried to appease everybody, right?
Yes, that's true.
In her party, in the dark, going 1,000 miles an hour. And what she should have done was show leadership. And to be honest, she should have canvassed internally that she was protecting the long-term viability of the Conservative Party, and she should have got an inner circle all aligned, and she should have done all the homework.
They're like rats in a sack, Dan. You've seen what they're like. I mean, this is just now, because she's postponed reality for 18 months. This is what would have happened right at the start. A united position on this. There's 4 or 5 different positions on leaving alone.
It wouldn't have been united, but they wouldn't have got rid of her in a short time frame. She had a window to do all the evidence-based stuff, which stays true to your heart, and to get a lot of that stuff out on the table very early, and then...
Well, then that would have rendered half of her cabinet barefaced liars. People like Andrea Leadsom, Boris Johnson, David Davis, they would have had their ignorance, whether deliberate or contrived, utterly unveiled on the cabinet table.
Well, this is the point. You don't appoint those people in the cabinet.
That's what appeased the Leavers. Appointing prominent Leavers to prominent positions was what essentially gave her a stay of execution for having been a Remainer in the first place.
This is my point. So her back was against the wall, and she basically had about 4 months, right, to get it all out on the table, and then the EU, the opportunity was then to negotiate pre-Article 50 and to do the job that Cameron didn't do, and to get movement in the direction that the harder right would have wanted.
I think we've got, with one glorious exception over in Isha, there is an idea here that she could, but for me it's politically impossible, even though it's probably academically admissible. Because all of these suggestions of how she could have done things better hinge upon an early admission that this was a mess that she had to sort, rather than that this was a brave new dawn that she had to deliver.
Yes.
And that's why it never would have happened.
Yeah, I'm 90% with your viewpoint, but because she had done something different, she had a window to be brave, and she hasn't been, and the chickens are coming home.
Yes, and what happens next is simply and this is where the state of the Labour Party is so heartbreaking, because what happens next is either the cake and eat it brigade find a new Pied Piper. In this case, it'll be Jacob Rees-Mogg, that doughty defender of, well, I don't know, someone, somewhere, one day, he'll defend something. Or everyone has to admit it was a mistake. And I can't see the second thing happening, so I think Rees-Mogg, put your money on Rees-Mogg then.
God help us.
He's only got to come second in the parliamentary party, and he'll romp home in the National Conservative Party, because he's the only one left. David Davis has to admit he didn't know what he was talking about because he's in front of the Select Committee. Someone like Nadine Dorries has to admit she doesn't know what she's talking about, because even her own colleagues in a WhatsApp group won't keep her ignorance secret anymore. Liam Fox, where is Liam? What does he do all day? He's not allowed to strike any trade deals until after March 2019, possibly not until after the transition period is over, but he's waltzing around with his portfolio. Philip Hammond's the only one telling the truth, and he's got a massive target painted on his back by precisely the sort of newspapers that have led us to precisely this position. And people wonder why frustration levels are rather high. And we are where we are. All of the people who told us Brexit would be brilliant now seem to agree that it is something of a shambles, but all of the blame for it being a shambles lies with everybody except the people who told you it would be brilliant. That is Britain in the 21st century, which is why movement now towards the only few people left who can still tell you that it's brilliant because they don't have any involvement in delivering it will be back in the spotlight. Step forward, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Anybody involved in delivering it has either given up, like David Davis, and kind of admitted that he didn't know one end of his Article 50 from the other while campaigning for it, or they've disappeared, like Liam Fox, or they're just carrying on being utterly and supremely self-interested, like the £46 million man Boris Johnson. And the great British public, of course, will not go after the people responsible for this because we're too busy going after each other. People getting cross with the messenger. There you go. Really bad news. Knock, knock, knock. I'm terribly sorry. That dead uncle that you received an email about who'd left £20 million in a Dubai bank account that you would be able to access if you only sent 10 grand to the facilitator who contacted. It turns out that was a con. And you're 10 grand down the hole. Yeah, I know they've sent you another email saying that if you just send them 10 more, everything will be fine. What? You've sent them a cheque. Well, they're robbing from you. How dare you? How dare you tell me that they're robbing from me? You disgusting Ramona. It's absolutely outrageous. I trust that man in that office, in that place I'd never actually heard of, until he got in touch to tell me that he had £20 million in the bank that he needed the help of a random Westerner removing from... What? Research shows that people who've already sent money to a con man will be more likely to send a second amount than they would have been to send the first amount in the first place. You cannot admit that you've thrown good money down the drain. So you throw more down the drain in the hope of somehow changing the nature of the drain. And that's Brexit now. You can't admit. No one can. 0345 6060 973. What are you getting in return? How dare you suggest that I'm getting a blue passport? What else are you getting in return? So, honestly, and I hold her no brief for her at all, if I had to choose with a gun at my head between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, I wouldn't know what to do. I just hope the gun wasn't loaded. But I don't see how she could have done it any differently. Because of the atmosphere, the environment created by the newspapers and the liars, the racist liars in particular, and because of the nature of the hand of cards she was given. If you think she could have played them differently, and you've got, I'm sorry, you have to have something a little more substantive than she shouldn't have been so pusillanimous or she shouldn't have been so pathetic. You need to actually describe behaviours. She got cheered to the rafters for triggering Article 50. Now looks like she did it really, really early. If she hadn't, what would the newspapers have done to her? She was compared to Margaret Thatcher and Boadicea on the front pages of precisely the same newspapers that are now reporting the sharpening of knives. Can they turn around and say to their readers, look, we've got this completely wrong, I'm really sorry, we got caught up in a kind of belch of nationalist fervour and we've ended up encouraging you to vote for a punch in the face or to have one of your legs amputated. It is not too late. It is not too late to save your leg. And you've got a fella on the other side of the room going, chop the other one off, and then we'll be better off. Who wants one leg? What's the point of having one leg? Chop the other one off. At least we'll be balanced. That's Brexit now. And yes, it's still very, very engrossing, but it's increasingly depressing. Because the levels of denial that you need now to sustain the delusion are becoming pretty brittle, aren't they? 0345 606 0973. Why do you like Jacob Rees-Mogg? I think he's a great champion of the working classes, the dispossessed and the left behind. Just have a little think. Have a little look at yourself. Jacob Rees-Mogg. Ian is in Romney Marsh. Ian, how could she have done it better?
Hi, James. I think it's quite simple how she could have done things better. And everyone seems to be missing it at the moment.
Sure.
But following the result of the general election, that was a clear indication that the will of the people, and I hate that phrase, is not a hard, fast and loose Brexit. Yes, of course, Labour were saying in nuanced ways, but we'll leave the single market or whatever. But you always.
Labour, I think Labour was cynical because you can claim that both parties' manifestos insisted that we would be moving out of various supranational structures.
And here's my point. I mean, your Farages would say, 85% of the people voted for pro-Leave parties. In some way trying to suggest that 85% of the people are now fully in favour and behind Brexit, which clearly is not the case. What Theresa May could have done is acknowledge that the general election was just as split as the referendum, and therefore we need to look at this and find out exactly what the people want from Brexit, not to deny it.
This is the problem, isn't it? This is where we are. Is that I can nod along with what you're saying, but you are describing behaviour in laboratory conditions in a rational universe. If Theresa May had done anything differently, she would have been publicly beheaded, metaphorically speaking, by the Murdoch male axis. She just would have been.
By those papers, she may have been, but there's plenty of other anti-Brexit papers that would.
No, there aren't, mate. I hate to break it to you, but there aren't. You've got The Guardian, which sells about 200,000 a week, and you've got The Mirror, which didn't campaign that hard on Brexit, although it arguably could have done. But you add up the numbers, and that 80% figure I keep throwing at you is accurate.
But the proof is in the numbers, in the way they voted in the general election. Surely that is enough evidence.
No, not with that little get-out. We're dealing with profoundly dishonest, cynical, self-serving spivs. So they will turn around and say that a vote for Labour somehow was a vote in favour of leaving the European Union. You know that's hogwash. I know that's Horlicks. They know that. So that everyone knows. But the whole of Brexit is built upon people saying things they know aren't true, but having such a low opinion of their fellow citizens that they think they'll get away with it. And that's how we've ended up where we are. And that's condescending and sneering, but it's also a matter of fact.
Sure. I can't disagree with that.
No one can. I don't want to sound arrogant. Actually, I've got no problem sounding arrogant. I don't want to sound unduly arrogant, but no one can disagree with that. This is now the period of Brexit where all of the people who said it would be great have to pretend that the reason why it's not great is because of all the people that said it wouldn't be great. You called it. It's come around a little bit later than I expected, but that's only because Theresa May's done such a cracking job of kicking the can down the road.
Sure. I just think a bit of backbone from her to stand up and say, look, the country is still divided. We need to.
But you're saying she should stand up. You're saying she should stand up to the male son axis, to the sort of lunatic fringe of her own party. Jill over in Isha's saying she should have stood up to the EU somehow. These were impossible. These were impossible acts. The only way she could have done what you've described is by admitting at the get-go that this was an almighty mess and she was the person to sort it out. But the political environment at the time was still selling it as a brave new dawn, as sunny uplands, as cake and eat it, as unicorns all round. You know they were. She couldn't have challenged that narrative because that's the narrative that swept her into Downing Street.
It is an almighty mess, James, but I think, just some honesty with the people. Just tell us, it's a mess. We didn't expect this,
Honesty with the people is the polar opposite of the process by which Brexit has been delivered. So if she is the woman to deliver Brexit, honesty with the people is not likely to be near the top of her to-do list. It's the whole point. So now we move towards the people who are still able to be dishonest. So you're left with either the people, the professional hecklers, whether they're in the media or whether they're on the fringes of British politics or whether they're on the backbenches themselves, or the people who can still pretend that things could go brilliantly. And that's why most roads would lead to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Fulton is in Brixton. Fulton, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Your question is, how could Theresa May have done this differently?
Better.
I've got a suggestion how the whole thing could have been done differently. So Theresa May could have taken the opportunity and done it differently. But I think if you'll come with me on a little thought exercise, it won't take long at all.
I've only got a minute. I'll bring you back after the news, Fulton, because you are so charming.
A minute will be absolutely fine.
Good man.
It's
He's a
simply,
keeper.
If the whole process had been done without the word divorce and without the word negotiation, because divorce implies two equal parties, each with an equal claim, which it isn't. It's one entity leaving a group, 1 to 27. So it's not a divorce. Secondly, negotiation doesn't come into it. There are clauses in place in case of the eventuality of someone wanting to leave. Let's turn to page 97, or whatever page it was.
This is what will happen. This is what we're all signed up to.
It's not a negotiation, and because the British population were led to believe it is a negotiation, they are under the impression...
but you've done it again. This is all the compelling calls for the last 90 minutes have involved people saying she could have done this better by telling the British public quite early on that the whole of Brexit was a con.
Well, she had the opportunity to stop and say, right, we're going to do this, you've elected me to do it, this is the way it's going to be.
She wouldn't have lasted until tea time, I don't believe. I really don't. It's amazing how quickly the pendulum swings, but these are the same people who thought she was Boadicea crossed with Margaret Thatcher who are now calling for her blood. If she'd told them at the outset that what they'd just done was an almighty boo-boo, she would not have lasted until lunchtime.
Perhaps it should have been done when the whole subject came up in the first place. And shall we have an election about a vote about leaving or staying? And if we leave, we already know what the story is going to be, and let's vote on that basis.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? They denied everything. Everything was invented, from the way laws are made to the prospect of an army that we're supposed to be frightened of being in, to the questions of immigration and borders. The whole thing falls apart. Every single thread of the argument is false. Demonstrably false, and it is time that's providing the evidence of the falsehood. So what could Theresa May have done differently? Answers from the pro-Brexit side of Britain? Tumbleweed. Answer from the pro-Remain side of Britain? She could have been honest, but that of course would have been suicide because of the pro-Brexit side of Britain, the tumbleweed merchants, who today, how could Theresa May... Oh, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob Rees-Mogg is the new fish. In answer to a question that they can't really provide, they will now offer up Jacob Rees-Mogg. So what exactly... Here are all the things we're losing. These are all the things that are changing. This profoundly imperfect but functional institution of which we're currently members. We're losing all of these things. Bing-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding. What are we going to get in return? Can't shout fish anymore. Just shout Jacob Rees-Mogg. He is the new fish. He is a blue passport made flesh. I was just having a look at that article. I thought I might have misremembered it. But no, it's true. It was shortly after the referendum result. Boris Johnson, June 26, published an article in which he tried to argue that voting to leave was not driven by anxieties about immigration. Tried to sort of just test the mood of the British public for a climb down from some of the more toxic campaigning, and he got sent away with a flea in his ear. This is Boris Johnson on the 26th of June 2016. I believe that this climate of apprehension is understandable given what people were told during the campaign, but based on a profound misunderstanding about what has really taken place. At home and abroad, the negative consequences are being wildly overdone and the upside is being ignored. Wow, what a difference 18 months makes, eh? Most sensible people can see that Bank of England Governor Mark Carney has done a superb job. Says the king of the Brexiters, Boris Johnson, whose troll army would pretty much have Mark Carney pretty near the top of the list, along with Gina Miller and Lily Allen, of people who've done the opposite of a good job. Strange times, but we will continue to report them without fear or favour.